Hey everybody, before we get started with the video, I just want to let you know about a little bit of an update with this. So this video comes a couple of weeks late because I've been having hard drive issues and I just got the hard drive back today. So this video is going to be going on the channel, and you'll notice the video itself is a little glitchy. It's because the video is technically corrupted. A lot of files from this hard drive itself got corrupted, and so I just want to let you know that I'm not going to be re-recording the entire footage for this video, maybe for some other videos, some upcoming videos in the future. However, for this one we're going to leave it as is, as most of it is just audio based anyway. So enjoy the video, enjoy the Lynde brew, and I'll see you guys next week for a brand new video. Hopefully that's not corrupt. What's up everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of Brewing with 50 bucks. This is the show where you take your favorite commander, we'll slap on a $50 budget, and we'll brew something that not only is able to win, but highly functional as well. My name is Steph and I'm coming to you from the General Warfare headquarters. Now, you'll notice something a little different about today's video. Not only do I look extremely handsome still, but it looks like the room has gotten a lot wider. Why is that? Well, for the majority of the last year, I've been filming on this. So if you don't know what this is an 18 to 35 millimeter lens for my camera. What I'm filming on right now is my Canon SL2. That's the main camera I've been using for the past year or so, just not only for filming General Warfare stuff, but for my own videography and my own photography portfolio as well. And I've been using this kit lens, basically meaning that this is a lens that comes with the camera itself. And just recently I just acquired a new lens. This lens right now that you're seeing me on is a 10 to 18 millimeter. So what that means is it's a lot wider. So you'll see me from here. This is how wide basically it goes. This is 10 millimeters. And you'll notice this, how it is now, is 18 millimeters. This is the standard length of what I've been shooting for the last year, basically. So enough pedantics aside, let's get into the main content of today's video. Today is the launch day of Innistrad Midnight Hunt. This is a set players have been waiting for, and players have been waiting to venture back into for a while, ever since Shadows over Innistrad. And from the spoilers, we got a lot of available commander options to brew and to play with. Link in the top right of your video right now to see my commander overview if you've missed it already. This is last week's video, by the way. And that'll ultimately bring us into today's video ultimately. So what deck are we brewing in today's video? If you haven't seen the thumbnail of the video, then let me remind you who we're building today. Today's brew is on Lynde Cheerful Tormentor. She's probably the most unique commander to come out of the set, focusing mostly on enchantments, especially in red, blue, and black. This is a color combination, especially in enchantments, we don't really see a lot of, or even at all. I think this is the very first commander focused on enchantments in those colors. She's focused on enchantments, mainly curses in this case, a theme I've actually brewed before on a different deck, and not only that, but allows you to retrace your curses and draw off giving them to your opponents. So let's not waste too much time with this, and let's dive into the deck brew and the commander overview, shall we? So Lynde Cheerful Tormentor is a 2/4 for 1, blue, black, and red for a legendary human warlock with death touch, and whenever a curse is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return it to the battlefield attached to you at the beginning of the next end step. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may attach a curse attached to you to one of your opponents. If you do, draw 2 cards. As you can tell with this, she's primarily focused on enchantments, namely curses, so the strategy of this deck is to get as many curses on the field as possible, have them come back with Lynde, as long as you can get rid of them, and profit off cards that love enchantments entering the battlefield. And as always, we brew these decks with a $50 budget, which includes the price of the commander, excludes the price of basic lands, and we also offer a $5 overage compromise, which means that most people can brew this deck for roughly $50, but we also add a $5 overage, which most people can actually afford as well, just to give a little bit more of an extra boost. The link to this deck will be found in the show notes down below. And before we get started, just don't forget to like this video, share it amongst your friends, subscribe to that channel, and hit that little bell icon. And we're going to be breaking this down in a very straightforward way. So enchantments, artifacts, creatures, sorceries, instants, and lands. So let's get started with the most important part of this deck, our enchantments. The majority of this deck is enchantment based. We have 19 enchantments, which includes our curses. We're gonna get started off with Curse of Disturbance. This one, anytime the enchanted player is attacked, either you or your opponents get to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So this goes for you, and anytime you're attacking, or anytime your opponents are attacking, they get a black zombie. That's a 2/2 as well. Curse of Echoes is next, and whenever the enchanted player casts an instant or sorcery spell, each other player may copy that spell and may choose new targets for the copy they choose. So this could actually be a very beneficial card, especially if your opponents are trying to ramp. Every person will ramp. If that player is trying to ramp, they ramp. Anytime that person wants to remove something, your opponents or even you have an option to remove something on their board, which is pretty good, ultimately speaking. Curse of Inertia is whenever a player attacks the enchanted player with one or more creatures, they can untap or tap a target permanent of his or her choosing. Curse of Misfortunes is probably one of my favorite curses in this deck and of all creation. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can search your library for a curse card that doesn't have the same name as a curse attached to the enchanted player, put it on the battlefield attached to that player, and then shelf your library. Anytime it gets to your upkeep, you can tutor up another curse and put it onto another player. I don't know about you, but having an extra curse on the field without having to cast it, much better than having it in your hand and casting it. Curse of Oblivion allows the enchanted player's upkeep for them to exile 2 cards from his or her graveyard. It's not a may ability, they have to do it. If they have cards in their graveyard, that is. Curse of Shaken Faith is whenever the enchanted player casts a spell other than the first spell they cast each turn or copies a spell, it deals 2 damage to them. So they only get 1 free spell each turn, and then every other time it'll tax them. Curse of Shallow Graves is probably one of the more expensive curses in our deck, allowing the player that attacks the enchanted player with 1 or more creatures, put a 2/2 black zombie creature onto the battlefield. This is the same thing like Curse of Disturbance. However, this also allows you to put a zombie on the field. So imagine having this and Curse of Disturbance on there, double zombies, double fun. Curse of Stalked Prey allows a creature that dealt combat damage to the enchanted player to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. Curse of Surveillance, at the beginning of the enchanted player's upkeep, any number of target players other than the player can each draw a card equal to the number of curses attached to that player. So for the one card that person is drawing, you and the rest of your opponents can be drawing multiple cards instead. So whatever one card they're drawing, you guys could be drawing up to 3, 4, or 5 extra cards. Curse of Thirst allows at the beginning of the enchanted player's upkeep, deals damage equal to the number of curses attached to him or her. So especially with something like Curse of Misfortunes, it just ramps up every time with Curse of Misfortunes. Every time it gets to your upkeep, you put a curse on them. Every time it gets the enchanted player's upkeep, they take extra damage based on each curse that comes onto the battlefield. Curse of Verbosity. Whenever the enchanted player is attacked, you draw a card and each opponent attacking that player does the same. So it's extra card draw for you or for any person that attacks. As Imprisoned in the Moon, you basically get to enchant a creature, land, or planeswalker and completely turn it into a colorless land, losing all other card types and abilities. This is one of the only ways to stop a Thrasios deck to my knowledge, and this is probably one of the only ways to stop a deck with an activated ability that does not require a tap ability or something that goes extremely crazy. Maddening Hex, whenever the enchanted player casts a non-creature spell, you roll a d6. And it deals damage to the player equal to the result, and then you attach the hex onto another one of your opponents chosen at random. So this hex, I guess in this case, this curse basically just travels between other players. Whenever they cast a non-creature spell, they take extra damage and it switches over to another opponent. Mirror Maid allows you to have it enter the battlefield as a copy of another artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. So you could copy not only one of your extra curses, but you could copy any one of the value enchantments or artifacts your opponents may have on the field as well, just for 3 mana, which is really, really good. Monastery Seed. If you've seen my videos before, you know this is a pretty fun pet card that I run in the decks. So with this, you either choose Collins or Dragons. With cons, at the beginning of your draw step, you can draw an additional card, but then you discard a card, so it's basically rummaging. And you can choose dragons to have your opponent's cast to target you or a permanent you control costs 2 more to cast. For the most part of this card, I usually like to choose dragons. Having that extra protection on your permanents is really, really strong, especially on you. Having that extra protection, just having your opponents have to pay more, use more of their resources to target your own stuff. It's much better for blowing up with 2 extra mana. That way you're depleting your opponents of resources. Revenge of Ravens is a really interesting card I decided to put in this deck. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's opponent controller loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is one of the only defensive cards in this deck. And basically it's whenever a creature, so I believe this stacks with every other creature that attacks. So if you're getting attacked with a mini army, it deals that much damage to your opponents and you gain that much life back. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. However, this is probably one of the only defensive cards that actually makes a gigantic difference in the deck. Shiny Impetus, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goated, which means it has to attack each combat if able and attacks a player other than you if able. And whenever the enchanted creature attacks, you create a treasure token. So not only can your opponents not attack you with this creature, but you're getting treasure on top of it. You're getting extra mana on top of it as well. Torment of Scarabs allows, at the beginning of the enchanted player's upkeep, they have to lose 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. For this basically means, like, for the most part, they either take a lot of damage or they're gonna be sacking a majority amount of their permanents. Most of the time, it's gonna be your curses, but with Lynde out, you're gonna be getting them back. So this is one of the ways you can get your curses back at the beginning of the next end step. And lastly, Trespasser's Curse. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under the enchanted player's control, that player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So that way, they're getting taxed on each creature that they play, and you're getting the life for each creature that they get. Next, we're going to be looking at our instants. With this deck, we want to be running a lot of instant speed interaction, especially when it comes to our strategy of having the curses on the field. So the first of which is Arcane Denial. This is one of the many counterspells we run in this deck. Having access to blue allows you to have access to counterspells, which really good, and you counter it. If controller draws up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep, and you draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep as well. So you're drawing a card, your opponents are drawing 2 cards, and you counter a spell as well. Brainstorm is probably one of the main blue staples in every blue deck. Draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. You're just basically filtering your draws, basically. Counterflux is a uncounterable counterspell, and basically you can overload it for each other spell that's been cast. And the original counterspell, not too much to say about it, 2 blue mana just to counter a spell. And now Counter Squall is a blue and a black counter target non-creature spell. Its controller loses 2 life. So you basically give them a slap on the wrist for any time they're casting a non-creature spell. Dig Through Time is the only Delve card that we have in our deck, and this is also one of the only cards that we get to see the top cards of our deck and basically put some cards in our hand as well. Fact or Fiction is another great blue staple, allowing you to reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Opponent separates those into 2 piles, and you choose one of the piles and put them in your hand, the rest in your graveyard. Frantic Search, draw 2, discard 2, untap up to 3 lands. Really, really good. And now Hellish Rebuke is a fun card from the last Commander set that I found really interesting in this deck. Until end of turn, permanents your opponent's control gain when this permanent deals damage to the player who casts Hellish Rebuke. Sacrifice this permanent, you lose 2 life. With this, if you're going to attack, go all out, the creatures connect, they have to sacrifice it, and they lose 2 life for each one of those sacrificed permanents. Infernal Grasp is a new card from Midnight Hunt. Destroy a target creature, you lose 2 life for 1 and a black. Negate allows you to counter a target non-creature spell. Rakdos Charm is a trimodal card, allowing you to either exile all cards from target player's graveyard, destroy a target artifact, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. Saw It Coming is one of the new cards from this year, dating back all the way to Kaldheim early in January, February. Counter a spell for 3 mana, or you could foretell this card and play it during a future turn. Teferi's Time Twist is a fun card I decided to put in this deck. You exile a target permanent you control, you return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, and if it enters the battlefield as a creature, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter, so you could basically save Lynde if you really wanted to, or save one of your creatures. You just exile one of the main things you want to protect. Terminate is Pretty much straightforward. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated for a black and a red. And lastly, Thirst for Meaning. 2 and a blue to draw 3 cards and discard 2 cards unless you discard an enchantment card. Next, we're gonna look at our creature spells. With this deck, we get a lot of value based on what our creatures are doing. So with this, we wanna get a lot of value from playing our curses, our enchantments, and having our utility go off with that. First off, we're gonna look at is a Cursed Witch. With this, it's 3 and a black for a 4/2, a human shaman. With spells your opponents cast to target a Cursed Witch costs 1 less to cast. And when it dies, you return it to the battlefield transformed under your control attached to target opponent. And it flips into Infectious Curse, which is in itself another curse. In its chance in a player, spells you cast the target enchanted player cost 1 less to cast. And at the beginning of the enchanted player's upkeep, they lose a life and you gain a life. So technically this is under your control. However, it's attached to a target opponent. And so you want the witch to die ultimately. Flip it over into the curse, and that way your opponents will be negating life each and every time. Agent of Erebos has the ability Constellation. This is probably one of the best enchantment-based abilities that doesn't just outright draw you a card. With this, with Agent of Erebos or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you exile all cards from target player's graveyard. This is really good against graveyard decks, especially if you're running another commander from the set like Old Stick Fingers. They basically just negate the entire deck of Old Stick Fingers, and even Agent of Erebos. Every time an enchantment enters the battlefield, the Constellation ability keeps triggering, so you can exile each of opponent's graveyards if you so wish. Now, Bitterheart Witch is one of the cards I've been trying to run in a deck ever since Innistrad came out. When it dies, you search for your library for a curse card, you put it into the battlefield attached to a target player, and then you shuffle your library. This is one of the ways we get to tutor out our curses. We just need the Bitterheart Witch to die. Blightcaster reads whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you can have a target creature get a -2/-2 until end of turn. So you could basically get rid of an opponent's board with this card, or like we saw with the Bitterheart Witch, you can actually just get rid of the Bitterheart Witch if you want to just tutor up an extra curse on top of it. Burnish Heart is extra ramp, and this is one of the only ways we can ramp this deck. It's colorless and allows you to sacrifice it to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle your deck. Now, Caliphate allows you to have extra protection on your enchantments as well. With your spells your opponents cast, the target of this permanent costs 1 more to cast, and its power is equal to the devotion to blue. So by itself, it's a 2/3. With Lynde on the field, it's a 3/3, and for each other card that has a blue mana symbol, Caliphate gets an extra power based on that. Doomwake Giant is one of my favorite Constellation cards. Whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, creatures your opponent control get -1/-1 until end of turn. With this, if you're just dropping enchantments and dropping curses, Doomwake Giant's going to trigger each and every single time. This way, you're going to be completely ridding your opponents of their battlefields. Grim Guardian is another great Constellation card that allows you to have each opponent lose 1 life for each enchantment that comes into play. Nightscape Familiar is a cost reduction card, allowing your blue and red spells to cost 1 less to cast, and you can actually reanimate the Familiar if you so wish. Protean Thaumaturge is a great Constellation card that I didn't even think actually existed until researching this deck. So whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you can have the Thaumaturge become a copy of another target creature, except it has this ability as well. So you can actually turn this creature into a bigger creature each and every time an enchantment enters the battlefield. Shoal Kraken is, again, another card I saw doing research I didn't think existed, but it actually works pretty well in this deck. For whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you can draw a card, and then if you do, you discard a card. It's rummaging. It's not going to give you a permanent card without a drawback. This is the best way we can draw some extra cards in these colors as well. And lastly, Solemn Simulacrum, Sad Robot, allows you to search your library for a basic land and put it into the battlefield, and then when it dies, you just draw a card. So simple. Next, we're going to look at our artifacts. Most of our artifacts in this deck is primarily ramp. However, we do have a couple of tricks up our sleeve with this. Starting off with Arcane Signet. This card actually dropped a lot in price, which I'm very surprised about. But for 2 mana, you get to tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. But this card has dropped so much based on this reprints, and I'm actually happy it's at a lower price range because it allows you to add it in these $50 budgets. Bloodthirsty Blade is a funny little card it decided to add in this deck where an equipped creature gets +2/+0 and is goaded. I was wrong about this Shiny Impetus being the only goad card in this deck. But for one mana, you attach the Bloodthirsty Blade to a target creature an opponent controls, and you only activate this as a sorcery. Small drawback as a sorcery speed, but that's not to say you can't have this. You can't have the Bloodthirsty Blade attached to a big creature your opponent's controlling, and they swing at another opponent instead of you. Commander Sphere is extra ramp, allowing you for 3 mana to add 1 color of any color in your commander's identity, and you sacrifice the sphere to draw a card. Crystal Chimes is great, especially in enchantment decks. For 3 mana, tag it and sacrifice the chimes. You return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to your hand. So, unless Lynde is not on the field, you can use Crystal Chimes to actually get back all of your curses and basically just keep the loop with your constellation cards going. Cursed Totem, again, is another card I'm surprised actually dropped in price. But for 2 mana, activated abilities of creatures can't be activated. So this turns off a lot of decks. Like Thrasios, it turns off. It turns off Kenrith decks. It turns off so many decks with this card. And the fact that it's at such a low price now is bewildering to me. Despotic Scepter is a really old card I didn't expect to make this list, and I remember actually playing this card when I used to run a Zedru deck. For what it is, it's a 1 mana artifact that you can tap and destroy target permanent you own. It can't be regenerated. So this is one actually of the ways at instant speed you could just destroy one of your own curses if you so wish. And with this, you can actually, with Lynde, get it back on the end step. Izzet Signet and Rakdos Signets are the only signets we are going to be running in this deck. Dimir Signet's a little too out of budget for us. However, for each one of these, it adds a black or a red, or a blue and a red, respectively. Mindstone it's a 1 colorless tap artifact, but 1 and tap it and sacrifice the Mindstone, you draw an extra card. And lastly, Skull of Orm is a 3 mana artifact. For 5 mana, tap it, return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. Admittedly, the ability itself is a little high costed for my liking. However, better to have rather than not have. Having the ability to tap to get an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand is really, really good, especially if you've already got rid of your Crystal Chimes and if you don't have any other ways of resurrecting your curses or even one of your creatures as well. The penultimate category we're going to be looking at is our sorcery cards. We're running 7 sorceries. However, with these, they range from destruction to actual tutors to actual drawing your cards. First of which is Byforce. For X and a red, you destroy X targeted artifacts. With this, we want to go in a big way, destroy as many artifacts as we want to. Next is another curse card. However, this is Curse of the Swine. For an X blue, you exile X target creatures. For each creature you exile this way, its controller creates a 2/2 green boar creature token. So each one of your creatures that gets exiled gets turned into bacon. Diabolic Tutor is one of the best staple budget card in black. Admittedly speaking, basically getting to tutor up your deck for a card and put it into your hand, then shelf your library. You don't even have to reveal it. 4 mana, it's a bit much, however, it's better than nothing. Preordain, another really good card. For 1 blue, you scry 2 and then draw a card. Basically, you filter the top draw and draw whatever is on top. Read the Bones is another scry. However, this is scry 2, draw 2, and lose 2 for 3 mana. Again, you're filtering the top draw, and you're drawing 2 extra cards just at the slight cost of your 2 life. Role Reversal is a very funny card I decided to add in this deck as well. For this, a blue, and a red, you exchange control of 2 target permanents that share a permanent type. So with this, if you so want to, you can actually just exchange one of your curses for another big, very important enchantment from your opponents, or you just exchange control of creatures. And you don't even have to give it to yourself. You can exchange it with your opponents and just be a troll like that. And lastly, Sign in Blood. Very simple, 2 mana, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. And lastly, we are looking at our lands. We're running 35 lands in this deck. This is the fuel to our engine. This is the way we're able to play our spells without the need of artifacts and ramping and such. So we're starting off with Command Tower. With this card, this is allowing you to add mana of any color of your commander's color identity. With this, especially so, we're gonna need as much color fixing in this deck because blue, black, and red are not well known for ramping. So having this and act as one of our commander's color identity is very important. Crumbling Necropolis is the only tap land that we're running in this deck, but this taps for each one of our colors. Next is Evolving Wilds, Myriad Landscape, and Terramorphic Expanse. Each one of these you very much well know if you've watched at least one or two of my videos. These ones allow you to just fetch an extra some basic lands onto the battlefield. One for Terramorphic and Evolving Wilds, and two for Myriad Landscape at the sole cost of tapping it at 2 mana and tapping it and sacrificing it as well. And the Myriad Landscape comes into play tap, but you've seen these cards already so much on this channel. And we are running 10 islands, 10 mountains, and 10 swamps. So that's how you build a human warlock that focuses only on cursing your opponents. And with our deck price of $50, which includes the price of the commander and excludes the price of the basic lands, this comes up to a total of $50.88. This is practically on budget from where we want to be, especially since the show is called Brewing with $50. This is exactly where we want to be with our budget. Not over, not under, just there, maybe a little bit more, but this, with the $5 overage compromise that we have, you have more than enough money and enough wiggle room to add any extra cards you want in this deck. So with that, let's go over some pros of this deck, some cons of this deck, and some out of budget recommendations. All right, so let's get started with the pros and cons. The first pro of this deck is that there's a lot of synergy to this, considering there's a lot of enchantments, there's a lot of basically creatures with constellation, or cards in general that profit off enchantments coming to the battlefield. There's a lot of synergy with this. It's pretty bulky and pretty defensive, I would also say, considering that you're targeting your opponents for great value, and there's a lot of cards that basically have defenses that either protect your cards from getting targeted or outright punishes your opponents for attacking you. There's actually a lot of draw in this deck. I've come to realize, especially with the additions of the curses that allow you to draw extra cards for every your opponent's upkeep, and the Sign in Blood, and for Preordain, and for Read the Bones as well. And it's actually very interactive too. So every time you play a curse or every time you destroy a curse, Lynde gets it back, and then the constellation trigger. That way, each and every time they do, it's just extra value for you as well. Now let's get straight to the cons of this, and the very first one is the most important one. It's most likely not going to win you too many games. I'm basically just read this outright. It's very, very similar to a lot of group hug decks where they like to be focused on just minimally messing around with the playstyle of the game. Kind of like a chaos deck also as well. However, your opponents are straight up just going to attack you, and you're just straight up just going to kill you before you actually have any overt advantage over them. There's not a lot of ramp in this deck. It's very, very reliant on its ramp to come in, its artifact ramp or the lands that come into play, but there's not a lot of ramp, especially like I mentioned before, these colors don't have a lot of good ramp in them. The colors are very restrictive to enchantment profit as well, so like I was saying before, green has probably the best amount of enchantment support, especially in a commander deck. If you're going to be going Enchantress, you have to play green. And blue has a lot of good interactions as well. However, green is the primary color if you want to go Enchantress. This is interesting. It's a very interesting build. However, with these colors, you definitely have to search for resources and ways to actually profit off your enchantments coming to play. And lastly, it's not a very aggressive deck, so you're not I don't think a lot of the time you're going to be attacking with this deck, especially with the power levels of these creatures being so low. Both Doomwake Giant and Caliphate are probably your two best attackers at that, and even then, like, it's not even like that significant to begin with, so you won't be attacking too much with these cards, so you're basically relying on enchantments and your opponents to do the work for you. And now, some out of budget recommendations for this deck. Ultimately, the first of which is Curse of Opulence. I know I omitted it from this deck. However, that curse is one of the most expensive curses to add in this, and if I added it in, it would have taken up at least a fifth of the price as it is. Given a restriction, it has to not be in the deck, but this is ultimately a really good card to add on if you so desire to play this deck and upgrade it down the line. Another really good card to upgrade this deck with would be Xantcha Sleeper Agent. This is another card you actually give your opponents. However, you're also profiting by paying you're paying mana to actually make your opponent lose life, and you actually draw a card off it. So that way you're actually profiting and getting more card draw off it as well. Rhystic Study is probably an easy card to add in this deck as well. Basically, anytime your opponent is casting spells, you ask them the all-important question, do you pay the 1? If they don't, you draw a card. Extra card draw, extra ways of getting your curses on the field, and the better for you. And lastly, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, a new card, well, relatively new card from Commander Legends, but this allows you to make this a copy of any creature you control. So you can have 2 Lyndes on the field if you so wish, and you can just get some extra profit off that, or you can actually have Sakashima come into play as another card with Constellation, which is actually really good as well. And that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I want to know from you guys, do you enjoyed this brew today? Or do you have any cards or suggestions you want to add to this deck? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you found enjoyment from this video, guys, don't forget to like the video, share it amongst your friends, subscribe to the channel, and if you can too, hit the bell icon to be notified of every video that comes out of this channel, because not only would I appreciate it, but this will help the channel grow, ultimately reach more people to see these videos, and ultimately grow the channel all-encompassing. And if you want to contribute to the channel in some way, or you just want to follow me on my socials, they're going to be linked in the show notes down below, but you see on the bottom left-hand side of your screen right now, my Twitter, my Instagram, my Facebook, and my TikTok. Those are the links to go. Those are the places to go to follow me. And not only that, but I post every Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This way, not only do I get everybody from the East Coast, but I get everybody from the West Coast as well. So until then, guys, please stay safe. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next Friday. So until then, cheers, everybody.